This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
It's February 23rd, 2026. 190 years ago today, the siege of the Alamo began in San Antonio. Inside the fort, there were about 200 soldiers fighting for the cause of Texan independence from Mexico. Outside, the Mexican general Santa Anna commanded thousands of troops with the goal of stamping out the Texas Rebellion. 13 days later, the standoff erupted into a full-fledged battle. Casualty estimates vary, but for every Texan partisan in that fort, at least 3 Mexicans were killed. That still left a lot of Mexican soldiers. And so, despite a fierce, against-all-odds fight, all of the men fighting inside the Alamo died, including roughly 30 Tennesseans. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your Daily Digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. The story of the Alamo has a lot of Tennessee connections. First of all, the man serving as commander-in-chief of the Texan Army at the time had once been this state's governor. Sam Houston left Tennessee to live with the Cherokee people in Oklahoma for a while before agreeing to do some work in Texas for President Andrew Jackson. He went there to help negotiate some trade agreements. He ended up falling in with other men from the U.S. who had relocated in hopes of turning Texas into the next great land for settlement and economic opportunity. Long story short, by the mid-1830s, they decided Texas would be better off as its own nation instead of remaining part of Mexico. It started a revolution in hopes of securing independence. Houston quickly rose up the ranks to be one of the more vocal leaders, and he gained control of the Revolutionary Army. Back east, in places like Tennessee, young men eager for adventure and a chance to strike out on their own saw a lot of promise in the Texan Revolution. The idea of manifest destiny, that Americans were destined by God to take over the entire continent, wouldn't be concisely articulated for another decade. But the idea was definitely in the air. And that sense that the white men of the United States were born to take all of the land they could reach powered an assumption that the Texas Revolution was sure to be successful. On his way to Texas, a man named Mackenzie Autry wrote to his wife back in Jackson, Tennessee, saying he was sure the fighting would be over by the time he got there, and that he was excited to find a new home for them there. David Crockett's reasons for going to Texas were a little more complicated. I've talked more in depth about him in a previous episode of this podcast, but to sum up, he was a Tennessee native and a Tennessee leader. He'd represented the state in Congress, but in D.C. he had some major differences with President Jackson. When the 2 most prominent politicians from the state fought on a national stage, folks back home picked a side, and it wasn't Crockett's. Tennessee stopped feeling like a place where he was really welcome. So Crockett reportedly told folks here, "You may all go to hell. I will go to Texas." Crockett's stated goal, according to family who stayed behind, was just to spend some time hunting buffalo. But they weren't exactly surprised when they learned that he joined the Revolutionary Army there. Still, they said it wasn't his intention when he left Tennessee. Now, as all of these men from Tennessee made their way to whatever kind of excitement, opportunity, or distraction that they believed could be found in Texas, the revolution continued to rage on. Men like Crockett got to the state as revolutionaries prepared to make a stand at San Antonio in the old mission fort called the Alamo. Now, contrary to some stories that get told, Crockett didn't bring any kind of regiment with him. But amongst those who did join the cause and end up there with Crockett were a group of men from Tennessee and neighboring states, especially Kentucky, who did naturally end up coalescing around him. He was famous. He was a natural leader. Folks started calling them Crockett's Band, even though a different man was their military captain. And none of them had been there very long. Crockett himself had only just arrived in Texas the month prior. They signed up for 6-month tours of duty in the volunteer army, and they were sent to be part of the buildup of forces at the Alamo. But that other Tennessean, Sam Houston, could see that the preparations of the Alamo weren't coming together well enough. He actually gave orders for the Texan forces to abandon San Antonio. He didn't think they'd managed to gather enough soldiers there. He wanted to relocate those 200 troops to some other place where they could have more success. But the officers on the ground refused to leave. They took their stand. David Crockett was 49 years old when he died fighting at the Alamo. And the other 30 or so men believed had been from Tennessee. Most were in their 20s. None of them survived. The Mexican army burned their bodies. By the end of that summer of 1836, publications claiming to be Crockett's own first-hand accounts started making the rounds. Those are the origins of the idea that Crockett had organized a Tennessee Mounted Volunteer Unit and arrived in Texas as a heroic fighting force. And the stories managed to make Crockett even more famous than he'd already been in his lifetime. Of course, the real story of the Alamo was traumatic enough. Remember the Alamo became a rallying cry for Houston's remaining forces at their final battle, which did successfully secure Texan independence. And as the territory became its own short-lived nation, Sam Houston drew on his experience as Tennessee governor as he took control as president of the Republic of Texas. In just a few minutes, the man who has returned to the Nashville Symphony in another time of transition. That's coming up after the newscast.
We know that local government isn't the only part of your life.
Like the mayor, I know that city government isn't the only thing you're concerned with.
We are still struggling to find affordable housing.
Particularly with this bus stop.
That's one of the unique challenges with my business.
I'm WPLN's Metro reporter Cynthia Abrams. I'm working to break down topics like transit, housing, and local government to make sure that when you are thinking about Metro, you're getting the full story. Follow my latest stories at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Vanderbilt University Medical Center is ending surgeries for transgender adults. An announcement of the change cites operational limitations and lack of surgical coverage. This comes after multiple mounting concerns about the hospital's care for LGBTQ+ patients. Vanderbilt had been the only Tennessee hospital providing surgical care for trans adults. Vanderbilt officials say the facility will continue non-surgical gender-affirming care for adults 19 years and older. They say staff are informing patients of the effects of this change, including people who had already scheduled surgeries. Vanderbilt's medical care for trans people has been at the center of a political and legal battle for the past 3 years. All medical care for trans youth was paused as state lawmakers introduced a ban in 2023, which ultimately led to the U.S. Supreme Court upholding the ban in U.S. versus Scrimeti. As Tennessee lawmakers focus on the budget this week, there will be less money to go around this year. WPLN's Mariana Bacallao reports.
This will be one of the tightest budget years for Tennessee in a while. But the same can be said of Tennessee families having to contend with a rising cost of living. While everyone from the Attorney General's office to the governor's school voucher program is looking for extra money, Democrats have called for an end to the grocery tax. But that's really up to Republicans in the state's supermajority who don't like the price tag for the state. House Majority Leader William Lamberth says a Republican-backed bill to end the grocery tax is still under consideration, but only after the budget is decided.
There's lots of variations that we can do. We could drop that by a percentage. We could drop that for certain items.
Democrats have proposed recouping that tax revenue with a tax on corporations, but the idea is not popular among Republicans. Mariana Bacallao, WPLN News.
Right after Winter Storm Fern, which left thousands of Nashville residents without power for days on end, Nashville Electric Service began hiring public relations and lobbying firms. Contracts obtained by News Channel 5 indicate the utility was up for spending tens of thousands of dollars to handle criticism from state and metro officials. NES previously stated Winter Storm Fern incurred the most costs in its history. They've also stated they want to avoid rate increases to residents. Less than 2 weeks after the storm began, NES hired a high-powered lobbying firm, Stones River Group, and agreed to pay $27,000 to $500 a month through May. The contract was signed before its special called board meeting on February 9th. In that board meeting, CEO Teresa Broyles-Applin said, "I'm clear that we did not meet the expectations of our customers." That wasn't the only lobbying or public relations contract the CEO signed. On the same day as the special called board meeting, Broyles-Applin and the NES board hired another firm, consulting and lobbying firm Hall Strategies, to help lobby metro officials. That contract is for $5,000 a month for a total of $35,000. Metro Council members Courtney Johnston and Emily Benedict say they believe NES was spending ratepayer money to sway public opinion. A historic East Nashville home, which had previously housed the Groove record shop, has been demolished without proper city approval. The 1940s-era home, located on Calvin Street, was knocked down by its owner, Condit Properties, LLC. And because the neighborhood sits within a historic zoning overlay, Condit would be required to secure a demolition permit, plus submit to a review by the Metro Historic Zoning Commission, which it did not do. The city has now issued a stop work order and is requiring the LLC to apply retroactively for the permit. The neighborhood's council member Clay Capp told the Tennessean that he's interested in, quote, making sure things like this don't happen with impunity and won't happen again. One of the songs on Reese Palmer's new record is titled Can You Run? It's written from the perspective of a black man during the Civil War, preparing to run for freedom. But it was written by a white man, Chris Stapleton, who originally performed it with the Steel Drivers. Palmer tells our midday show This Is Nashville it was author and producer Alice Randall who brought the song to her attention.
I was immediately just drawn to the material because it sounds like a really upbeat, yeah. And then you listen to the words and you're like, oh, I take some of that upbeatness. It translates for me into like anxiety, the hope of possibly being free, the anxiety of running and like what that may entail and what may happen and that sort of thing.
Palmer has been a country artist for 2 decades. Initially, she cut racial references from her songs, believing it would appeal to a larger commercial audience. In her new record, blackness is the central theme. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. This is Nashville's local news and NPR station, 90.3 WPLN News. Conductor Leonard Slatkin wants the Nashville Symphony to become more accessible, more willing to meet audiences where they are, and better known among locals. Even at 81 years old, he has fresh ideas about modern leadership of an orchestra. He's been around. He's held the top job at symphonies in St. Louis, Detroit, Washington, D.C., and London. This is Nashville host Blake Farmer interviewed Slatkin on the eve of his first concert back on the podium in Nashville.
We live in a visual age now. Not only do we hear music, we see it. Everything is in 4 or 5 minute sound bites, even in the classical world. But orchestras haven't figured that out yet, and they're going to have to. To relate to a younger audience, you have to speak their technological language. One of the things we're going to try to do over the next few years here in Nashville is make the orchestra an integral part of the younger audience as well. Bring them along. Let them understand that the music we play is special, but it's also for everybody. Everybody can listen. It does help maybe to know a little bit about the background of a Beethoven, but it also is a good idea to know a little about the background of Johnny Cash. The more you know about his life, the more you appreciate the music. It's exactly the same thing in the so-called classical field. Young people are sponges, and they absorb what will become important for them in the future. But if you don't expose them to it, they won't know about it. So why not give young people the option? You want to be interested in creating a book, you want to write, you want to sing, you want to do this, make sure that they have a little bit of training, and mostly think about it in terms of history. If you block out all of music and say there is no such thing as music in terms of history, you're really in real trouble. Imagine Nashville without looking back and seeing what were the roots of country music. If you abandon that and don't look at it, you are really depriving yourself of something very important, heritage.
You know, you talk about live performances and what's the difference. And yes, we're visual, but I feel like in person, live, you also get it's just not even on the best audio system. It is not the same to listen to a recording as the chills that might go down your spine from a chord that you couldn't have imagined.
You go to a concert, you don't know from 1 minute to the next exactly what's going to happen, even if it's a piece you know really well. But if you don't know it, you're coming to a concert for the first time, that experience here in Nashville, walking into the Skirmerhorn, the Laura Turner Theater, and just seeing it, you already know you're in for something that's extraordinary. And hearing it, unbelievable experience, but you got to get there in the first place. Once you're there, you're going to be hooked.
What is your vision for like the modern leadership of a symphony that might be different from how we've been doing it for a few decades?
Well, the openness to the different styles of music that exist out there. That's the first part. Second part, is real involvement in the community to make yourself known to the degree, for example, that somebody on the Predators might be known. People may not go to the hockey game, but they'll know some of the star players.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Let's make our musicians the stars. Let them know who they are and what they do. And even if people don't ever go to the concert, there's an awareness of what it is. So the symphony has to become a little more non-threatening.
Wow. Well, before you came, not to say you hadn't been here in the last 20 years because you are everywhere, it seems. But so 20 years ago, you come, the symphony had not yet won a Grammy. Now it's won 14. I wonder what goals you might have for the symphony in these, in this next decade.
I think it's to expand our audience. Usually we like to say that symphony orchestra appeals to 5 to 6% of a given population of a community. I'd love to see that get up to 10%. Certainly the awareness of the orchestra. Continue to grow the orchestra in its repertoire and its ability to play.
That's Leonard Slatkin in conversation with Blake Farmer on This Is Nashville. The music you hear is from Slatkin conducting the opening gala at the Schermerhorn Symphony Center. At age 81, he has returned as the symphony's leader for the next 3 years. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. A little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You could make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.